We are live, or we are hanging out.
We are hanging out. I like hanging out. I feel like a monkey. Which is quite interesting because we wanted to talk about animals today and animal ethics. So I guess it's appropriate that I hang around like a monkey.
Maybe.
So have you got a word of the day?
Is that ethical?
Is that ethical? What, hanging out like a monkey?
Yeah.
I went to the zoo recently for my daughter's birthday, and she went there with her cousins, and there were some monkeys there, and they didn't do anything disgusting that I shouldn't be talking about, don't worry. Well, I don't know actually, having said that, they weren't filthy, but it was pretty foul what it was doing. This chimpanzee was sitting there eating an entire onion. And I just beggars belief that he could just sit there and eat an entire onion. I mean, in front of my eyes, he took quite a large onion and ripped off the skin and then ate every last. I mean, how can you do that? That's amazing. But there you go. So monkeys can eat entire onions. How about that? Who knew?
Well, on the topic of monkeys and zoos,
yeah,
you know how the saying goes of like monkeys flinging poo.
Yeah.
Have you heard that one?
Oh yeah, yeah.
That is actually a symptom of being in a very enclosed space for extended periods of time.
What, throwing your feces?
You knew that, but it's not. Apparently, it is not common for monkeys to exhibit that behaviour of flinging the poo, but they do it as a result of being completely bored and
yeah.
In a zoo, apparently, which is why some people have issues with the concept of a zoo.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we're talking about animal ethics, and I went to a zoo. Perhaps you wouldn't want to go to a zoo. I don't know.
I think, well, all of these things, we'll get into it. I don't. Zoos are sort of not on the top of the priorities list. I think in some instances. Circuses and zoos can lead animals to behave in such a way that humans would if they were locked up
like
in an enclosed space and didn't have any interaction. So rocking backwards and forwards, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And being quite unsociable and, angry spells, that type of thing, that can happen to animals.
Yeah.
But it's not something I immediately thought of when we were going to talk about animal ethics.
No, I hadn't thought of it at all. It's actually a bioreserve, so it's set up specifically to, I guess, try and conserve endangered animals. So it's not just a zoo. It has a purpose, and money that it raises, if it has any profit, I think the money goes to help orangutan sanctuaries and things like that. So, Anyway, have you got a word for the day?
I do. It is esoteric.
Esoteric. Interesting.
And I've heard definitions of esoteric to mean knowledge which is only known or understood by small groups of people. But in this definition that I'm looking at, it says difficult to understand or not publicly disclosed or confidential.
Interesting.
So yeah.
Okay, so that would be. So would the CIA and the FBI would that qualify? Would they be esoteric?
I suppose it depends on the information that they have. So if they had something which was not known to the masses, I don't know, like knowledge of UFOs or something like that.
I thought you were going to say that. Yeah. Area 51.
That would be esoteric.
Well,
but if they just had knowledge of like terrorism or something, I don't think you could make that.
Yeah. Well, because the thing is that the WikiLeaks and Julian Assange being 5 years or something in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, they weren't very happy about him breaking, releasing some of this information. So I think there's some, can we say esotericism? Esotericism.
You just make up a word.
Well, it just seems logical, esotericism, and it seems quite apt, really, and ironic, considering, what we're talking about. And then there's probably some anti-terrorist things in there, and they're using... Anyway, never mind. Esoteric. It's a good word.
Good word.
So I had some questions, Tom, because, a few years ago, I can't remember exactly when, I mean, you'll know, but you suddenly told me that you were going to become a vegetarian. And I think, if I remember rightly, we went for a meal, and it was a pad Thai meal, which came with chicken. I think it was chicken pad Thai, and I think, memory might not be serving well, but I'm pretty sure you said that this is it. You're going to go vegetarian. And I just thought, what? And then probably about a year after that, then you told me that you were no longer vegetarian. And I thought, I thought you wouldn't stay vegetarian. It's a pretty tricky one to keep. And you'd actually gone further. You're a vegan now.
Yeah.
So
this is something I've actually just realised, and this is completely coincidental. Or maybe there's something going on in the unconscious that I'm unaware of. But it is actually the anniversary of when I decided to go veg initially.
Really?
And the reason why I know that is because it's May the 4th today, and I remembered it was because of the Star Wars joke about May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th.
And we were supposed to do this call yesterday, so this is not something that I'm doing on purpose, but
complete chance.
It's been 3 years since I decided to do that.
So you became a vegetarian 3 years ago today, to this very day. You decided to go Star Wars veggie.
Yeah,
great, good for you. But I thought that that was due to your desire to have a healthier plant-based diet. But now I understand that it's due to ethics, and it's about animal cruelty and things. Is that right?
Yeah. So initially, I was under the impression, or I had watched various different things, which said that
YouTube videos,
the healthiest diet, documentaries, that type of thing, and films and some YouTube stuff.
Yeah.
That said that vegetarianism and veganism is the healthiest diet that you can be on. Since then, I have, I always look to disprove my position, because I think it's a good way to look for counter arguments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Since then, and we talked about this slightly earlier, since then I've realised that almost everyone claims that the diet that they're promoting is the healthiest diet. And it may even be a call that would be good to do, like we said when we talked about it.
Yeah.
Because, and I also said that the science behind nutrition is a much lower standard of science than other science.
Yeah, sure. Everybody's trying to flog their diet, aren't they? They're all saying, we've got the best diet. This is the healthiest one. Eat this, and there's all sorts. I mean, I can think of many different diets. All of which are, a lot of them though are just temporary solutions for the purpose of losing weight, right? Rather than a life plan.
Well, there are some obvious claims that you can make for various diets, which actually, if you were only looking at weight loss, there are verifiable claims. Like, for example, if you're eating only meat and vegetables, you're going to lose weight. If you're on a vegan diet and you're not consuming too much, refined stuff, you're not filling yourself with vegan chocolate or something.
Yeah.
Then it's calorie restricting, and you're probably going to lose weight. So there are claims that you can make which are, like I say, verifiable. But in terms of what's actually healthy, there's just a load of confirmation bias. So all the animal rights people say that the vegan diet is the most healthy one. All the meat eaters say that well, not all, but you know what I'm trying to say, the paleo diet is the most healthy, and they're all making claims about studies, and the people who do those studies never make those claims. So
that's interesting.
In most studies, there's a conclusion at the end of the study where they're very careful about how they pick their words.
And
so
that
they're
gets
not making
taken
big
out.
claims.
Yeah.
Yeah, and whoever quotes this study will say things which the people who did the study aren't claiming.
Yeah, I've seen that elsewhere where people have said, "I never said any of these things," and and it becomes it just becomes common knowledge. Everyone, it's a bit like the old one where you lose 10% of your body heat through your head. When it turns out that it was some U.S. Marines or something, and they were testing out new clothing, and they were covered, except they had no headgear. They didn't have any hats or anything. So evidently the clothing worked really well, and it stopped a lot of the body heat from dispersing through their body, and they lost 90% of their body heat through their head, which makes sense. And since then, it's been sort of that study has been taken and blown completely out of proportion, and now you regularly hear people say, "Oh, you got to wear a hat because you lose 90% of your body heat through your head," which is complete nonsense. Your head represents 10% of your body, and therefore you'd expect it to lose approximately 10% of your body heat. So it's based on the area, isn't it? Really, So yeah, the Atkins diet was one that I thought of, and the Atkins diet, I think, is the exact opposite of your diet now. Is that right? So you just eat meat, and you don't eat any meat at all.
If I'm not mistaken, Atkins is about no sugar. So I think you can eat vegetables, although there are people on a meat-only diet. That does exist, just as there are people like fruitarians who only eat fruit. But the Atkins is about essentially obliterating sugar from your diet. So anything you eat is getting you to go into ketosis. I've actually done the Atkins years and years ago.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, I wouldn't want to do the fruit diet. I think that would be fairly fruity. I mean, I'd like to meet a bunch of fruitarians because they sound like a jolly bunch. But they're basically eating nothing but fructose, really, and I guess there's lots of vitamins and stuff in there. But yeah, I mean, it can't be healthy because a lot of it's acidic, isn't it, as well? So it wouldn't be very good for your teeth. I don't think.
Well, one thing that just as a conclusion, I would say about which diet you choose to go on is that the human body is just incredibly resilient about. If you only have access to certain types of foods, your body will sort of change in a way to, okay, this food group isn't available here, so I'll use this source of energy.
So it adapts,
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's amazing, really.
So anyway, you decided then, initially it was the sort of health thing that got you thinking about it, and then at some point you came to a decision, or you came to a position that's more about the animal ethics, right? So how did you come to that position?
Just about learning more and more, and like you say, it's now a philosophical position. It's now not based on anything really to do with diet. I do think there are people who require who aren't able to be on a vegan diet. They require some sort of animal products for health reasons.
Oh, right. Okay.
Which I sympathise with. Although when I've heard this, they don't go into the exactly what they're missing. So the issue I have in some instances, and what I always ask is, when people make the claim that the vegan diet is not sufficient, what is it that you can't get from a vegan diet that you can get from a traditional diet?
Yeah.
And when you start singling out those things, there are not many, and you can supplement if you need to. So
it seems to me that a lot of people would talk about what are we? We're an animal that sort of grew up on the plains of Africa, as best as we know. Originally, we were in trees and we ate fruit, and then as I understand it, the climate dried out and the trees started thinning, and we started walking between trees, and then we started eating other fruit and stuff. So we've got good color vision. Apparently, we're able to identify more colors, more tones of green than any other color. And we've got color vision so that we can identify fruit that's ripe against fruit that isn't. Whereas a dog, for example, is fairly colorblind. There are certain colors that they just cannot see, and it's quite interesting if you have, I think it's an orange or a yellow or something, and it's very obvious to us, but if you put it on the floor next to a sort of a red or a brown, your dog simply can't see it because they camouflage. So we obviously have, in our distant past, we ate a fruit-based diet, but our teeth, they're not traditional carnivore teeth, are they? I mean, we haven't got canines and stuff that extend down. We're not but we are able to eat. We are able to eat meat, and funny enough, when you look at a lot of monkeys, they have sort of canines, fangs, and yet most monkeys. Or am I right? Maybe this isn't true. I kind of think that most monkeys eat bananas and fruit and things, but maybe they're maybe they eat meat as well.
So it's this is another one of those things which is if animals will tell you that we're animals. The animal eaters will tell you that we're carnivores, and the vegans will tell you that we're herbivores, and they will have their arguments for saying those things.
So we're omnivores.
How I look at it,
somewhere between the two.
Omnivores, yeah. And my position is that if it is the case that animals can suffer and feel pain,
yeah.
Animals are not equal to us in their ability to reason, but in their ability to suffer. And if we have a choice, so let's say you sit down at a restaurant, for example,
yeah,
and you have a choice between a hamburger and a veggie burger. If that is your choice, and you have the ability to make one which potentially has caused suffering and one which hasn't caused suffering,
yeah,
even if we were herbivores before, or carnivores, or whatever it might be,
yeah,
the fact that we don't have to do that now is how you make that decision.
Yeah, so you're suggesting that you have a decision to make each and every time, and effectively, if everybody decided that they prefer the veggie option, then there would be a lot less animal cruelty, right?
Well, I mean, the key word there, in my view, is preference. So, is it morally justifiable to eat animals when there are other options available?
Got you.
And the only reason why you would do it, and we can go through the other reasons, is just personal preference. And my view is that personal preference isn't a reason as to why you should be able to do that. Because you have to justify why it's okay to do that to animals or non-human animals, but it's not okay to do it to humans.
I don't know. I saw something. I've seen two things when I in my travels. Many years ago I travelled around the world a lot, and there are two places that I've sort of springing to mind. Firstly, I travelled to China. And there was a little a market, actually quite a big market, and in the market you could buy literally any kind of animal that you wanted. And I saw cages with snakes in them, cages with all sorts, and there were these turtles, quite large turtles, not giant turtles or anything, but they're probably a foot long or more, so fairly big animals, and they had been hung. They'd been skewered through the foot, and they were just hanging there from the ceiling in one of these stalls. And then this guy came along, and he pointed to one, and he said something I can't speak any Chinese, so I have no idea what he said, but he pointed to one of these turtles, and the turtle was unhooked, and the guy behind the stall just got a big knife and slit its throat there and then. And I just thought, that's just absolutely horrific. And all the other turtles could see this as well. And it occurred to me that, you know, there were all sorts of animals, and this was their fate, you know, and they were all kept, they'd all been, I guess, born in captivity or captured, and then they were put in tiny little bamboo cages, a lot of them, and their fate was to be killed in that way. And as a Westerner, we're not used to seeing that. I know that there are slaughterhouses and things where animals are killed on a mass scale, you know, thousands and thousands of them on every day, but we never get to see it. So we're kind of, it's not. I guess we don't. Well, at least I don't really think about it that much. When I see a nice steak, I had a lovely barbecue recently, and you know there was lots of delicious meat on there, and it was delicious, nice sausages and burgers and all sorts of things, steaks. And I never really gave it a second thought, but when you see it there in the flesh, it's horrific. The other thing I just wanted to mention was I was staying in a hostel in a place called Malacca in Malaysia, and almost right outside the hostel, street food is a really big thing in Malaysia, and they've got some of the most beautiful, delicious, fantastic street food. Little stalls everywhere along the streets, and really great food. I really can't say enough about it. But there was this one thing. There was right outside the entrance to the hostel, there was a guy there with a little sort of hot plate and a fish tank, and the fish tank was full of frogs. And there was a queue of people at lunchtime, and there was literally a queue waiting there. And they'd point to one of the frogs in the tank, and the man would put his hand into the tank, and all the frogs would be desperately trying to wriggle over each other and push the others out of the way. And then he would pluck one out, and he'd put it down on the board right next to the fish tank, so all the frogs in the fish tank could see what was happening. And then he'd slit it, and then in one very, very, defined and clever movement, I guess, he just whipped its skin off in one. And then you were left seeing this frog just writhing in, I can only describe as agony, with all its skin taken off. And then he cut its legs off, and then he cut its arms off, and then he chopped it up finally into bits, and just put them all on the hot plate to fry them up. And this all happened within a space of about 2 or 3 feet, so within 1 meter of the fish tank, and all the other frogs can see what's happening. And it was just sickening, and yet there was a queue of people waiting to eat them, and he'd go through countless frogs in any one given day. I don't know where he sourced them from, but he went through all these frogs, and it was incredible. And there was an Australian girl who was staying at the hostel, and she literally couldn't get in or out of the hostel because she couldn't bear to see it. And that was the most stark example of what I consider to be animal cruelty. Just the thoughtlessness. It's not just that it's happening, it's just that they don't care that all these frogs can witness their future, witness their fate. And I just thought it's just the most barbaric thing. I could not separate my ability. I mean, I couldn't separate the idea that if I was in that, and if we were humans in that fish tank, and there's some other life form, some aliens or whoever it may be, were doing that to us, it would just be the most disgusting and horrific thing. It's almost concentration camp style horror, isn't it? Or even worse, possibly.
Well, that's actually what you said about the aliens is actually a thought experiment that you can do to see whether it's okay to actually do what we're doing to certain animals in order to eat them, which is because we're top of the food chain, and we say like they're not as intelligent as us, or they look different or something like that. If aliens came down and they were significantly more intelligent than us, they say their average IQ was like 1,000 or something, and they decided to
that might be more intelligent
jail us, kill us, eat us, etc. Would that be morally justifiable because we were so much more intelligent than them? And of course,
that makes sense.
We would say, no, we wouldn't want that to happen to us. In the same way that, although I'm not under any illusion in the sense that I don't think, in the example, where like for example a frog, if they saw something, I don't think that they would put cause and effect together. I'm not. There's no way of knowing, but in my view, it's all about suffering, the ability to feel pain, and the credit that I want to give just before, because none of these are my own arguments. So there's just a few people that I'd like to credit. One is Peter Singer. Second is Sam Harris, and the third is Richard Dawkins. And Dawkins says, as a evolutionary biologist, says that it may be the case that animals actually feel more pain than we do based on the same experience, because it's a lesson which tells them not to do something again. And because they're less intelligent than us, they require a higher amount of pain in order to learn that lesson.
Okay, makes sense.
So when, for example, a pig gets boiled because they have to remove the hair, and a lot of them are still conscious, there's every reason to believe that that's more painful for them than it is for us. And the sort of consistency, to be morally consistent, what you were talking about with China, and how we have this sort of love affair with dogs.
Yeah, we have more empathy.
Pigs are more just as intelligent or more intelligent than dogs. If you could imagine that happening to dogs, would you still be happy to eat a pig, for example? And some of the reasons given are like physical appearance, intelligence, the fact that they're a different species, etc. And none of these are reasons as to why it's okay to kill them and not okay to kill a human, because you can just say, okay, if it's about intelligence, there are human beings which are significantly less intelligent, but does that make it okay to kill them? And of course the answer is no. So you can't use intelligence. If it's physical appearance, there are people that are unfortunate in their physical appearance, so it's not that. Some people say that. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we could go down the line in terms of, because I know I should wait for you because you said you had a question about what are the main objections.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Them anyway,
I just think as well that I don't think that we're so different from. We have, we breathe air, we feel pain, and anyone who's ever owned a pet will know that pets feel pain. So it's a dog feels pain, and if you pull I wasn't going to say if you pull the wings off a fly. I don't know anyone who could do that. I think you'd be the Karate Kid if you could. But if you could pull legs off a spider, for example, then the spider is going to be in pain. I'm sure of it. It makes sense that there is pain because, like you say, pain has a function, and it's most aptly recognised when you can recognise that pain has a function because there's a rare disease, isn't there? An ailment where people are born without the ability to feel pain, and they don't know when they've done damage to their body. So pain is the way that you avoid damaging your body, and so it stands to reason that this is a very ancient thing that has been passed on from sort of fairly simple organisms right up to us, and we still feel pain. So I find it very difficult to believe that animals don't feel pain, and I tread on my dog's foot every now and again because she likes to be very close to me, and if I'm busy I don't always, she moves around underfoot, and occasionally I tread on her foot and she gives me a yelp, and we know that she that she feels that. So I don't think that, and the cause and effect thing, I don't think that you have to be. I don't think it's a higher level of intelligence. Cause and effect is exactly the same thing. Certain animals show much more ability in certain tasks. So I know that there was these tests where they had, I think, tubes where they had sweets, and they tried to get kids to figure out how to get the sweets from the tubes. It was a sort of Chinese puzzle kind of thing, and it was difficult to do. Chimpanzees were able to outperform them, and then they were able to outperform adults, and they were significantly better at that particular task than we were, because it's a task that we don't really require very much, so we've never really developed the kind of brain power that's required for it. So it's just easier for them to sort of, I guess, visually or understand how that works. Whereas at the same time, they're not able to use tools as well as we can, and we know that they can pick up sticks and probe logs that are hollow with insects and things. So we know that they can do rudimentary tools, but same with certain birds. They were able to figure out quite complex tasks where humans failed to do so. So we got different abilities depending, I guess, on our lifestyles and what we need them for. But I think cause and effect is something that's important. It makes sense that we all learn from mistakes. My dog there's a cat that lives nearby, and the cat definitely doesn't like my dog. It fascinates my dog that this cat would sit there hissing at her, and she's reacted to the cat in a certain way. She knows to give the cat some space, because she ran up to it the first time, nearly got her eyes scratched out. So she's learning to avoid certain things based on, the same kind of feedback that we'd have. If something is unpleasant or it hurts, she will try and avoid it, and it kind of makes it, for me, the frogs being in the fish tank and being able to see what's happening to the other frogs. It's difficult for me to imagine how they're not able to see that hand in tank means that you're dead if you get picked. So I'm not sure about that argument, but again, there's probably a lot of people who've done a lot of studies into these things. But
you mentioned a couple of things. One with the some people go to the insects argument. So instead of acknowledging that it is obvious that certain animals do feel pain, they'll say, "Oh, well, what about insects?" I was going to mention insects. There's a good principle. There's two things which I would say there. One, and I've said it to you once before, and it's what's it like to be? Is it like anything to be this table that I'm sitting at right now? And of course the answer is no, it's not like anything to be that table. What's it like to be a fly? I am not convinced that it is like anything to be a fly. It may be the case that they're just sort of operating unconsciously, and they just sort of react to external stimulus. But I'm pretty convinced that it's like something to be a dog or a pig, as you said. So in terms of that position, you don't have to say...
It's consciousness is what you're referring to, isn't it? So like a computer...
Potentially.
Or a robot that can weld a car together in a factory, has a purpose and all the rest of it, but it doesn't understand what it is doing. And so you're saying that a fly might be like that. It just flies around, but it doesn't actually. It's all based on instinct, and it doesn't actually, which is a form of programming. Instead of with a robot with computer programming, it would be genetics. So it'd be DNA programming, but essentially you're saying it doesn't have any form of consciousness.
All I would say is that there's no way of knowing. There's no way for me to say one way or another. I don't know whether it's the case that that flies would feel pain or be able to, in the same way that some of the animals that we eat do and we mass produce.
But there is one way of finding out.
Factor.
There is a way of doing it. Jeff Goldblum did it in the film The Fly, where he accidentally turned himself into a fly, didn't he? a human fly. So I think he, if you want to know about that, he's probably the best person to answer that question.
If
I
that
wonder if he's
was
a
the
method
case,
actor.
I'm not signing up for that.
No.
But the other issue was complex nervous system.
Yeah.
So in some of the other arguments that I hear are, and in famous films and that sort of thing.
So these are arguments against being a vegan.
From the ground. Yeah. So it's also been said that vegans get a lot of flack because they, in some instances, aren't shy about voicing their opinions.
Right. Okay.
But if you at least acknowledge the claim that these animals have complex nervous systems, then it's logical to basically say that they can feel pain, whereas plants, for example, have no nervous system, they have no brain. It's not possible for them to feel pain.
Except that's not true, is it? Avatar, the trees, they kind of have a consciousness. Sorry,
I'm not prepared for Avatar, Jake. I've got nothing to say about Avatar.
Okay,
It's
so
been
we'll
about,
steer clear of 10-foot blue people with tails.
Yeah. Unless, of course, there's new evidence that's presented, which you got to look at it, haven't you?
Yeah, I have heard people saying that animals and plants and vegetables have feelings, but I think that's kind of pushing it a bit. You're right. I don't think they have I don't have I can't imagine they have capacity. So these are arguments that you heard against veganism. How does that differ from vegetarianism, and why did you decide to become a vegan as opposed to a vegetarian?
Mainly because everything that applies to the killing of an animal with respect to pain and suffering applies just as much to dairy products or eggs, for example.
I love eggs.
There are some exceptions to that, but in terms of the mass production, meaning in order to serve the demand that is required for dairy and eggs, the argument applies just as much. So again, in order to be philosophically consistent, if you care about causing pain and suffering, and there is an alternative available, or you don't require this product in order to survive or thrive, then obviously you can't be involved in that. And the argument also comes from the point of view of less suffering is better than more suffering. So vegetarianism, for example, is better because there's lots of pigs and cows and stuff that are not going to have their throats slit, or however you want to say it.
But they're still enslaved.
But veganism is better because it's less suffering than vegetarianism.
So it occurred to me that's it. I mean, animals in a farm, in a way, you could say that farming was one of the most important factors in terms of, human culture, in terms of enabling us to feed cities and have cities grow up in the ancient times, and to support a large, stable population that doesn't have to sort of meander and wander off and like a nomad. So farming methods have been incredibly important to us, but in a way, farming is, when it comes to animal farming, is about enslaving animals and bending them to our will, right? So at the moment I think I heard there's about 1.5 billion cows in the world, and you could argue that those cows are only here because of us, because we are supporting them, and a lot of those cows are used for meat. Okay, that's fine for steaks and stuff like this. And if we got rid of, so if we all became vegetarians, then we wouldn't have the requirement for so many cows. But then we would still have a lot of them. These cows, we'd look after them, and they would produce milk and cheese and things like this for us, whether they like it or not. But from my perspective, that's a bit like the capitalist system, right? Because they would be You know, you have to pull your weight, and you have to, you contribute somehow to society. And I utterly agree with the idea that they shouldn't be slaughtered. I find it abhorrent, to think that you've got these animals, the thought of looking after an animal and raising it and giving it food and giving it injections to make sure it doesn't get any horrible disease and everything. You win the animals. I guess the animal comes around to trust you, and then when you've gained the animal's trust and it's fat enough, then you take it off and cut its throat and eat its meat. I think that's absolutely disgusting, that kind of philosophy. And yet I still eat meat because I don't often think about it. Right now I'm thinking about it, and it kind of makes me feel a little ashamed. But vegetarians wouldn't do that, though, would they? They'd be looking after the animals, right? And the animals would be producing products. They wouldn't suffer necessarily, right?
It depends. So a couple of things there in terms of like the difference between why we're able to this disconnect, which you mentioned a couple of times, and there are a couple of reasons why the disconnect happens. Some are based on lack of facial expressions, and this all comes down to how much are they like us?
Right.
So if they're not like us very much, then we're quite happy doing things to them that we would never do to other members of our own species.
Yeah.
Some of it is down to size. So if they're much smaller, we're less outraged by things.
That's true.
And facial expressions and size. It's not a logical thing to say, okay, that makes it okay to kill them, for example. And then also the sounds that they make. So this is the reason why people don't see any problem with killing fish, is because they don't have anywhere near the facial expressions that we do. They're quite small, generally speaking, and they can't make any sounds if they're, as they're, pulled out of the water with a hook through their mouth, for example.
Yeah.
The other
thing
you
lots to
said
scream, don't they, when you throw them into boiling hot water? Is that right? Or is, I don't eat seafood, funnily enough.
I'm not certain that's the case. I'm not sure. I've heard something which says that if they did scream every time they were thrown into boiling water, then it wouldn't be done as often. But I don't know about that. With respect to milk and cows, the reality of that industry is pretty, at least the mass-produced stuff is pretty horrific. And the reason is there are many of them, but it starts with cows only produce milk when they're pregnant, or after they've been pregnant, rather, when they've given birth.
Right. So
in order for them to continually be giving milk, they need to be continually impregnated, and they don't arrange a special night with a bull. That involves a fist or a pole with bull semen.
Oh yeah, nasty.
And then when they actually give birth, they have this connection with the calf or whatever it's called, and the calf is taken away from them, and you hear visible screams about the fact that their child, who they just gave birth to, is being taken away. If it's a male, then that's veal, so they'll have their throat slit, and that dairy industry supports the veal industry, basically.
So they're interlinked, yeah.
Yeah, and the milk that is supposed to be for that veal is then consumed by humans, and they can't be moving around when you want them to give milk, or when you take the milk. So they have to be confined to a certain space for as long as they can be.
Right,
and
so
then
it's a
that
bit barbaric,
process, that process repeats, basically. And for up to weeks after, they show visible signs of depression about the fact that they've lost their child. And this happens over and over again.
Yeah, that's
so you
pretty
could,
horrific
in theory,
when you think about it,
say that the milk is worse than just killing them one time and eating the meat, but that's debatable in a way.
Yeah, that's Yeah, that is pretty horrible. Actually, when you pointed out, I hadn't really considered that. I mean, for me, the main factor for me was that there's 1.5 billion cows. I think not just cows, but other meat industry. I nearly called them products. Animals. The consume about a quarter of the world's arable land is given away to providing food for them. I think I might be slightly wrong, but it's a huge amount of land. So I was going to ask about grass-fed or free-range animals, and how you feel about that, because my brother-in-law has chickens just running around, and they produce eggs, and they have a nice life, I think, running around the farm. They get given food every day. I think the truth of the matter is that after a certain age they stop producing eggs, and then there's no financial value in continuing to provide feed for them. So then they meet their maker. So it's not perfect, but I mean they probably only live 2 or 3 years anyway, don't they?
Which animal is that? Sorry,
chickens. But I mean free range animals in general.
Not sure about the lifespan of a chicken. I don't know the answer to that one. With respect to, you said two things there. One about the land that is taken up by animals, and there's a if you accept climate change as a major issue on our planet, which I do, there's an argument there which to be said that almost, I've heard it said that it's either the leading cause of climate change or one of the leading causes. So
methane production.
There's an argument there that cows have major methane issues.
Yeah, they fart all day long. I hear that the average cow does 12 poos a day, in addition to all their farts. So that's a lot.
Who
of
did
methane.
you hear that from?
I like to, I like to do a bit of research every now and again.
12 poos.
Yeah,
if
I don't
you
know
take
how
anything away from this podcast, that's a major win. Is the 12 poos.
12 poos. Yeah, I've never managed that myself. It's I can sometimes not even.
It's a good thing too.
They do. I hear that. I think that's kind of well researched actually, and sort of a bit of a fairly well understood statement that the cows alone produce more methane, and so much methane in fact that they're a higher contributor to global warming than all the cars in the world and all the traffic that there is in the world, which I think is extraordinary. But so free range not a goer then for you.
Well, that's the next thing I was going to say was they make these terms up. And you won't be surprised to hear that when you buy, for example, free range or organic, the criteria which has to be met in order for something to be free range is not very very good. For example, a chicken, in order for a chicken to be free range, it has to have a certain, I don't know. I should get the actual number, but I think it's like 2 squared feet to itself or something like that in order for it to be free range. So although these sound as if they're very good, there's still horrible things that happen to the animals in order for them to be free range, and it's still not. All it is just it's the difference between having a very, very small amount of space to yourself versus not being able to move anywhere because there are so many 30,000 chickens in one sort of hut or something like that.
My brother-in-law's probably got about a dozen chickens, and they have probably about 500 square feet of space for them, so they may not be representative then, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, again, it comes back to what you've talked about before, and that's the incentive. So, if you've just got chickens in your back garden that you look after, and occasionally you eat the eggs, then I mean, it comes back to what we said about the more suffering versus less suffering. Obviously, that's much better than having thousands of chickens in a very small space where they can't move.
I had egg and chips just the day before yesterday. 2 eggs and homemade chips that my wife made. And I've got to tell you, the free range eggs that come from my brother-in-law's garden are, well, they're just in a completely different level to the kind of eggs that you buy in the supermarket. I mean, you just can't compare the two. They're so delicious, and the ones in the supermarket,
it's actually
can't eat them anymore.
Something which applies across everything. I think something that's mass produced versus something which is grown in your back garden.
Yeah.
I think that applies all across the board.
Yeah, I mean, nobody would. I mean, I heard that if you drink, I saw an experiment where they got champagne, a really, really expensive champagne, and they got a bottle of Blue Nun, which they put through a soda stream, and then they went out into the shops, and they offered people free glasses of champagne, and they had to say, well, one of them is really expensive, one of them's cheap, which one's which? And most people went for the Blue Nun cheap one as being the more expensive one, which just goes to show that probably most of those people aren't used to spending hundreds of pounds on a really expensive bottle of champagne. So there probably was a taste difference, that someone who is used to really good quality champagne would notice that that's the good quality champagne. But in terms of the general taste, for your average person who wasn't really aware, they were unable to identify the more expensive one as being the better quality, and they preferred the taste of the cheap wine that went through the soda stream. So that's definitely not the case with free range eggs, I can tell you. I can't imagine anyone would be able to confuse the 2 eggs. My brother-in-law's eggs are just so tasty, and the ones in the supermarket. A few months ago, I had an egg, and it was so nice. And my wife again was cooking, just frying up some eggs, and I said, "Oh, can I have?" And she made me one, and I was, "Oh, that's so good. Is there another one? Can I have another one?" She said, "Sure." So she made another one. She fried another one for me, and the second one was just a shop bought one because we'd run out of free range. Because that's the other thing about them, that there isn't a limitless number of them, and so I tasted the difference, and the taste test was unbelievable. I mean, the second one was, I just barely didn't want to eat it. So yeah, I mean that I suppose means that's coming from a healthier chicken that's eating better and getting exercise, and so that makes sense.
Yeah. The other around the chicken industry as a whole is that all of the male chicks don't lay eggs.
That's true.
So
they get
you see all these baby chicks,
Yeah.
And they all just get put into a grinder.
Oh.
And we're talking about, if you imagine how many chickens there are that human beings get through.
Oh God.
We're talking about millions of baby chicks getting put into grinders.
Oh no!
I know these are just words, so it's quite difficult to explain how it looks.
I've seen a conveyor belt, and is that what you're referring to? I think you shared a clip.
It's worse, really, because they sort of like a slide which goes into something which sort of curls round, and you just see all of these chicks just, it just goes red basically, and
that's just horrific.
Sometimes some of them actually get through, and they don't, they're not dead, but all they do with the baby chicks is they just put them in a big bag, and presumably which is just waste.
Yeah.
And then they just suffocate in the bag.
So they're not even used for to make some kind of patty or anything. They're not used as a chicken, in to put together into some kind of processed chicken. They're just wasted.
They're just grinded up.
That's just nasty. That's really nasty. I had no idea that it was that horrible. To be honest, I hadn't really given it a lot of thought, and I suppose, like you say, what was the word of the day again? I forget what it was, but I think it's kind of apt in that there's a sort of almost a conspiracy to keep these things hidden away from people, out of sight, out of mind, and we don't really think about it. And we're, like you say, there's a big disconnect between going to KFC, which I really like, and having a nice Zinger Tower burger, and going to the the farm where these chickens are I guess mass produced almost, or mass farmed. That's
the word of the day is esoteric.
So esoteric, yeah.
And there are actually laws in certain countries where you can't go and film this stuff because
I can understand that.
The meat and dairy industry has a good hold over the politicians or their major contributors. So some of the laws favour that. But I don't know necessarily whether it's conspiratorial, but that's just factual in the sense that it's becoming law that you can't actually film this stuff.
So I think we are going to, well, I hear people saying that there are more and more people are eating insects these days, which sounds absolutely horrible. And I think for most people, if you ask them, would you eat grasshoppers ground up or something like this, they'd say absolutely not, that's disgusting. And yet in lots of cultures, especially in Asia where there's large populations, and that's a good way of getting the protein that they require. I think for the Western palate, we would require them to be ground up and made into some sort of burger or sausage or something like this. And I've seen people on TV try this meat and say, "Oh, it's really nice," and they'd not know what it is. So I think, again, if you know that it's insects, there's just something. Certainly, I have it. I think when you watch Bear Grylls or someone eating some of these insects, you just think, "Oh my God, that's disgusting." I mean, Bear Grylls has made a lot of money and a whole a life for himself out of eating food, really, that, well, I guess insects and horrible things that most people wouldn't want to eat. I think he served a bit of salmon that a bear had killed to Barack Obama when Barack Obama was the president of the USA. So bear killed and bear grilled salmon. But would you eat insects? If that was the next logical progression away from meat, and, everyone's worried about the planet and all the cows, so we start eating insects. Would you eat those? How would that sit with your ethics?
Well, coming back to the more suffering versus less suffering, it would certainly be better if the mass population ate insects over animals. But my position is that you can get everything you need from other sources, so there's no need to do that. But I did hear years ago that because what we're doing is unsustainable with respect to animal agriculture, there is a higher likelihood that we're going to be eating insects in the future. But like I said, I don't think it's necessary.
But I guess it's down to are they conscious as well? Because, like you say earlier on, they're smaller, they haven't got facial expressions, they don't make the noise, so they're easier for us to sort of, not worry too much about the ethical side of things. But if you were going to kill one cow, that would feed many people, and yet you can understand the vegetarians and the vegans saying, well, it's cruel to kill the cow for its meat, unless perhaps you absolutely had to, but through choice. It's the wrong choice. Whereas to get the same kind of amount of food and protein from insects, you'd have to kill multiple insects. You'd have to kill thousands, perhaps, or certainly hundreds of insects to feed one person, right? So
I would just come back to the ability to suffer. So if human beings can suffer more than a cow, I would put the human being above the cow on the importance scale. I'm not a person who thinks that all animals are equal to humans, and some people do take that position. But I would consider a cow, because of all of the things we've talked about, considerably more important than an insect, and therefore it's better to eat insects than to eat cows. But again, if it is possible for an insect to suffer, it's better to just eat plants, because there isn't any reason to eat an insect if you can eat a plant.
I love my dog, Stella, little dog. She's gorgeous and she makes me happy. But my daughter asked me a question the other day, which I thought was really interesting. The question was, Daddy, you love Stella so much, but you love her more than people. And I went, well, yes, I love Stella more than most people in the world, because, you know, I know her and I don't know these other people. You know what I mean? It's there's the sort of element of, well, you know, we're familiar. She's family. So, you know, so yes, I prefer. But then they said, well, if there was, you know, either Stella, my dog, or a human being that you didn't know had to die and you had to choose between the two, who would you choose? And I had to think about this for some time, because I love Stella so much. And
Sounds like your daughters are little philosophers.
Yeah, they are. They pose some very difficult questions. I mean, I think I just get out of it by saying, "Oh, look at that! Who wants some ice cream?" Perhaps that's why they asked those questions in the first place. But we'll never be able to answer
really
this one.
difficult
We'll get
question.
ice cream out of it.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, you know, yeah, I would have to say that you know, a human being. I kind of based it on the fact that a human being is going to live longer, right? So my dog will live 10 years or so, and you know, I'll look after her and love her to bits all that time. But then a human being, you know, you would expect them to live longer. But then I thought, well, what about an old person? You know, an old person who's lived their life against her, and she has, you know, she's just 7 months old. So, you know, it's quite a difficult question to answer. But ultimately, you know, do we then value a young person more than an old person? And I think, you know, there are lots of factors, and I think probably we would have to say, if I was going to save a young person or an old person, I'd save the young person. And then my daughter said, well, what about Hitler? So you can't ever win these. Obviously, I would save Stella over Hitler. And she said, well, I'm glad to hear that you prefer Stella to Hitler. And I was like, right, ice cream time. But yeah, obviously, you know, you don't know who the human being is going to be, you know, and I know that Stella's got a very lovely character, but yeah, although she saw a grasshopper the other day, and she killed it, which surprised me quite a lot. It tried to hop away from her, and she thought this was a fantastic little game, and killed it and ate it. And I thought, I wonder if she realizes that was a living being that she's just killed for the fun of it. Do you know what I mean? That was quite an interesting one for me. I have no idea if we'll ever know whether she realizes that she's just killed something, or she has any kind of concept. Presumably she doesn't. But then
I would say she probably doesn't. But
no, she probably doesn't. But then again, we do. So that's the difference. And I guess you can't judge others by what they do. You judge them. You don't judge others by what you do. You have to judge them by what they do. In other words, how their level of understanding. So yeah, I kind of let her off from that. It was a bit cruel, but I let her off. I've got another question. I think, you know, this is an interesting one. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world of bioengineering and the genome, and it's fascinating, and we are advancing into the future at an exponential rate. So I think we're going to see massive changes very, very soon. Imminent changes. Of the future is not just around the corner anymore. The future is right here, and it's a question of just, you know, becoming aware of what's already going on. And there's been meat that's been grown, so artificial meat that isn't really artificial in that it is genetic meat, but it's been grown in laboratories. So it's not, you know, it's a bit of meat, it's a bit of beef, for example, but it's never actually been an animal. It's only ever been grown to be eaten. What are your thoughts on that? Would you eat that?
It's, I would not personally eat that, but it's valid in terms of I don't see any problem with that.
Because I think that's the way we're going to go. I think it's probably very expensive at the moment, but in the future, I would imagine, maybe that's the future of the meat industry. That's possibly the way it's going to go. Because, as I understand it, the meat industry it's all about economics. It's a part of it forms a part of the capitalist system that we're all part of, and it has to be, it has to be profit making. So, or at least it needs to be subsidized if it isn't making a profit, so that it can continue. And it may be that at some point we're able to produce tastier meat that's never been an animal and it's never been killed or had any cruelty done to it. It's got no consciousness whatsoever, and it's cheaper, and it's not damaging to the environment. So you wouldn't eat that?
Yeah, I would say no. There's none of the downsides there, I would say.
Yeah.
But I mean, like I said, because I would not. I've got like a prediction in a way, in that I think that at some point soon we're going to see something else like mad cow's disease.
Right.
Maybe not with cows, maybe not with I don't know what it'll look like necessarily. Yeah. But I think that's very much a cause which produced an effect, which is what we're doing right now is, right, I think, quite high risk.
Right.
And I think something's going to happen which is going to remind people that we're doing something we shouldn't be doing. Not from an ethical perspective, but these animals, they're distressed, they're in dirty environments, and we're pumping them full of antibiotics and et cetera, and there's going to be some sort of effect of that which is going to have a negative impact on us. Well, with respect to the lab meat, there's no way I would want to try that until it was tested for years to see whether it was safe or not. So that's my position there. But
it's the same. I think most people would say no, and it's a risk factor, isn't it? You think, oh, I don't know, it doesn't sound natural. It doesn't feel right,
Might just be because it's something that we're not used to.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's like that. It's like the cars, We're seeing these people self-driving cars now, and I saw on YouTube the Singularity University does some fantastic videos about some upcoming technology, which is amazing. And I think self-driving cars are here now. I think all cars will be going electric within the next sort of 10-20 years. And you'll still have the occasional, people still have horses, right? Even though horses are not a good form of transport anymore, but you still have people who enjoy horses and they want to have horses and they like horse riding. And there are horse shows and so on and so forth. So I think the same will be, for the cars. I think the real classic cars will continue, and people will still collect them, and they'll still love them, and they'll still take them out to drive. But I think for the vast majority of people, we're going to go electric, and for the vast majority of people, it's going to inevitably be that we're going to be driving. We're not going to drive at all. We're just going to have self-driving cars. And I've seen videos where their crash rate, approximately 95% of all accidents are caused by driver error. So if you take away the driver from that, then you're left with 5% of the number of accidents that are there already. And yet we intrinsically have a problem trusting a computer to drive a car. And we've seen so far 6 deaths from self-driving cars. And since they've started off, and they've done hundreds and hundreds of thousands of miles, and we've seen 6 deaths, which is a far, far superior road mortality rate, than standard drivers, which is to be expected when you think that 95% of accidents are caused by driver error, right? And yet, did you know
presumably, as they grow, the driver error will be. The quantity of manual drivers will less and less, and presumably that percentage will go down because of the increase in computer driving.
Yeah. So a lot of people now are frightened of getting in a self-driving car because it's kind of the unknown and it seems kind of weird and you know, but the truth of the matter is that they drive better than we do, and I think it's inevitable, like you say, that you know more and more people, and I think there'll come a turning point when suddenly everybody wants to drive a car that drives itself, and so maybe in the next 10 years there'll come a time when suddenly it will just be the thing that you, when you buy your next car, you want it to be self-driving, and that's it. And I'm really looking forward to those days because I'm going to start riding my bicycle again. Because I don't like riding a bike. I know you ride a bike, but I don't like riding a bike because, I mean, I've ridden a bike lots in the past on the roads, but everyone I know sooner or later has an accident with a bike, and it's almost always caused by a car, a driver. And I think when all the cars are driving around by themselves, you're not going to have to worry about that. So you can just get on your bike and you're not going to have to worry about some driver who was talking on the phone or changing the radio or you know, just distracted in some way. I saw a clip where they saw you're in a car that's self-driving in California somewhere, and there's some cars driving along the motorway, and all of a sudden the emergency beep comes on, the warning hazard sound, beep beep beep, and the car stops. It starts putting the brake on and it stops. And then in the clip that I saw, they replayed that and they said, how many people here would start braking when the computer did? And the answer is nobody, because the computer had seen an accident 2 cars ahead, and it hadn't even seen an accident. There was no accident at that time. There was simply, the computer had realized that the car ahead, 2 cars ahead, wasn't going to be able to stop in time to avoid crashing, and so it started braking automatically. And there's no way on earth that any human could have anticipated that, because you just couldn't see it. It's just not visible. And yet the computer has been analysing the road ahead and said, oh, that's going to be a crash, and started braking. And when you see that kind of thing, it really brings home to you that technology is going to solve a lot of our problems. It's going to make the roads a lot safer. Most people in the UK who are killed by road traffic accidents. So I'm so happy to know that our kids can grow up in a world where they don't have to worry about being killed, either driving or being run over. And I think it's the same thing.
I thought that you were going to say a different one, which was the way they program these self-driving cars.
Yeah.
They have to think about what sort of decisions they're going to make in the instance of, for example, high-risk situations. So you use the one of the driving down the motorway.
That's
so
right.
The car is driving down the motorway. Ahead of it is a lorry.
Yeah.
On that lorry is, for example, bale of hay.
Yeah.
And it falls off the back of the lorry.
Yeah.
To the left of the car is, let's say, a 4x4.
Yeah.
To the right of the car, this is a hypothetical, so I'm aware it's a motorway, but there's a bicycle.
Okay.
Now, based on that, the programmer has to make the decision of either do you drive into the 4x4 on the left, or do you drive into the cyclist on the right?
Yeah.
And that's the type of decision that these programmers have had to at least attempt to program into the car when making that decision about what does it do.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point you've made there about that. And I would.
So beware if you're going to get back on your bike.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but I would counter that with another one, which is that essentially there's been 6 lethal accidents involving drivingless cars since they started, unless there's another one that's happened today or yesterday that I'm not aware of. And of those 6, 5 of them were caused by other people. So there was only one that was caused by the car itself out of the 6. So and this was it was a sunny day and it had been raining and there was a lot of shimmer and there was a big lorry. In America they have a lot of chrome lorries, and it was an oil tanker or something. It was a petrol tanker and it was chrome. I've seen them, they're very beautiful. The sun glints off it and it confused the car and it didn't see this lorry because of the reflection, and then it drove under the lorry, and that killed the driver, or the person who was in the car anyway. But the thing is that every time a driverless car has an accident or has a near miss, it is analysing the problem and sharing that problem potentially with every single other driverless car in the world. So the rate of learning is exponential. Whereas with a human, when you make a mistake in a car, if you're lucky, you learn by it and you don't make that same mistake again. Whereas in computer-driven cars, they make a mistake. One car in Timbuktu makes a mistake, and every other car almost instantly has learned from that mistake. And so it's every single time they're much less likely to make that mistake again. So yes, when you've got somebody initially making a choice about, do you plow into a bicycle, or do you plow into the or do you plow into the other 4x4? What do you do? Well, maybe over time that's answered by experience, and they come up with another solution, or there is another solution we haven't even thought of that will come about and make that better. But certainly, there are always going to be some accidents. That's for sure. I said earlier, there's 95% are caused by driver error, so that means 5% are by something to do with the car itself, presumably. So there is always going to be a small amount, but it's going to be 95% safer than it currently is, which means that you're very unlikely to get run over crossing a road, and you're very unlikely to be involved in a fatal crash when you're in the vehicle itself. So there's always going to be an element of risk, but I think it's going to be a lot safer, and I think it's going to be a much nicer environment for our kids. Apart from anything else, they're not going to be drinking and sort of breathing in all this pollution and things, and the self-driving car, you can share them, because you don't always need a car. So you can say, well, we can pool the cars, so our whole community can have a car each, and rather than have a car each, we just have like a few cars between us, and when we need it, we just require it, and if and then it comes along and it picks us up and then takes us into town and then drops us off. We don't have to worry about parking, and off it goes off to do something else. So I think this is great things, but the reason I mentioned it was actually to do with the lab meat, because I think people mistrust new technology, and they mistrust cars, and I think they mistrust meat that's grown in the lab as well. But I think over time, as you've said, it kind of answers all of the issues, doesn't it? It answers all the sort of all of the reasons why you've become a vegan, and I suppose technically, would you be a vegan if you ate lab-grown meat?
Well, I mean, it's a fairly, there are disagreements within veganism about who's a true vegan and who's not, even with respect to clothing and, all sorts of stuff. But I think. So, do you not have any
leather at all?
No. Well, there are products that I own which I owned at the time before I was a vegan. But with respect to, for example, leather shoes, if a cow has to die for me to wear a particular set of shoes that I want in order to have its skin,
what do you mean?
Then no, I don't want those shoes.
I thought you said a cow has to die, so you're going to go out and kill a cow. Well, I see what you mean. Yeah. So no is the answer. So you okay. Good to know for your birthday or something, or buy you a gift.
Well, there are a few that I wanted to close off with, and then if it's cool with you, we can decide what we're going to talk about on the next one.
Sure.
And I wanted to make a special mention about this particular example, because I thought it was a very good, at least an attempt at being a comeback for being able to kill animals and eat them, and why it's morally justified.
Okay.
And the reason was, it's morally virtuous to be vegan, but it's not a moral obligation. And morally virtuous versus moral obligation example would be if a child was in the road and it was about to be hit by a car.
Yeah.
You would be morally virtuous to put yourself at harm's way in order to save that child.
Yeah.
But if you were the parent of that child, it would be a moral obligation because that child is your responsibility.
Okay.
So the reason why I think that's not valid is because you're not putting yourself at risk by ordering something else. There's no reason why you can't just have one thing over another with respect to, I don't know, at a supermarket or at the restaurant or something like that.
Yeah.
There's a natural causes question. So if a cow is a healthy cow, happy cow, and then dies in front of you,
Yeah.
Is it valid to say it's not going to suffer, so can I eat it? I actually think that's a valid argument.
Yeah.
It's just whether you would want to eat it. And then you've mentioned the meat grown in a dish, and the other two were it won't make a difference. Let's say if you decide to eat a veggie burger today, it's not going to make a difference in whether you're avoiding meat because of the large supply chain. And this is a Peter Singer answer. He essentially said if you avoid meat for all of your life, there's every reason to suggest that in a supply and demand economy you're going to have saved a good amount of animals, even if it's not every time that you sit down at the dinner table.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then the last one is I don't care. And some people have said that it's the most difficult argument to get around because if someone says they don't care, then what are you going to say to them? And my answer is it's about acting as though it's a world that you want to live in. So if someone says, I don't care whether you live or not, and they're a psychopath, obviously you don't want to live in a world like that.
No, you don't want to live next door to them, that's for sure.
So it's not really a valid excuse as to whether it's okay for killing.
Your wife isn't a vegetarian or a vegan, is she? And what about your kids?
No, she's not. Well, there are some. I think vegetarianism for children has been fairly well tested, and it's perfectly reasonable to suggest that a child can be on a vegetarian diet and not have any issues. Yeah. With respect to veganism, I don't know. This is just an open statement. I don't know whether it's almost, like an experiment to put a child on a vegan diet.
Yeah, so you want to make sure they got all the right nutrition, balance and things. But I guess
I don't. Sorry, go on.
You've never tried to convince me to become a vegetarian or a vegan. And we've been to a couple of restaurants that are vegan restaurants, and I've really enjoyed the food. I really don't mind eating meat or another. For me, it's if the food is tasty, it's tasty. I think a lot of people have in mind that vegetarian or vegan food is horrible and it's not very nice. But in my experience, that may have been the case. But in my experience, it's lovely. It was very tasty food, and so it doesn't bother me one way or the other whether I was going to eat meat or go vegan. I'm not one of these people who has to have meat at every meal or anything like that. But I do enjoy bacon.
Well, I was a big meat eater before I went veg, so
I like ham and bacon. I was
big into the steaks.
But there are there's a lot of meat that I genuinely enjoy. I like chicken, and I'm not that fussed about beef, to be honest, but I really like chicken, and I really like ham. I like I'm feeling hungry now because I'm on my fast day. I do alternate day fasting, right? So we're talking about food now, and I'm on a day where I don't eat any food, and so I'm regretting that now. But yeah, I like bacon, and it goes very well with eggs. So for me, it would be difficult to give up these kind of things, and I think that's that's one of the main problems that we've had, is that it's still such a minority thing that it, people feel that it's a tough choice for them to do. As I say, I don't mind eating vegetarian or vegan food as opposed to sort of meat. It doesn't bother me at all that I wouldn't be eating the meat, but it's the lack of choice, or the apparent lack of choice, which I think would put a lot of people off, right?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. So if you are looking at it purely from a how easy is this going to be for me, then it's right. There's not as much choice. It's more difficult, but I don't see that as a valid argument. It's personal preference for me is not valid in terms of whether or not you get to eat something or not.
But you don't push it
valid
on people.
if.
Sorry.
Well, I honestly believe that there are more important things to spend your life promoting. Now, I'm not saying that animal rights activists are doing something wrong necessarily, so I want to make that clear. But there are children starving to death, and this very much for me is a practical philosophical position. So it's not necessarily something that I'm passionate about. It's just I see this as just a common sense position on things.
Fair enough.
But if I have to choose, and generally speaking we do have to choose how we spend our time, I put children's welfare above animals every time. So if I'm going to try and convince someone of a particular position, like whether it be charitable giving to make sure that people don't starve to death, I'm going to try and convince them of that rather than animal well-being. But the reason why I think it's important to consider this topic is because you do it every time you sit down at the dinner table, whereas every other thing, you can.
I guess so. It's very relevant every day, isn't it?
Exactly.
So I got a question then. I guess it's the last question because we've been talking a long time now. So do you miss it? Do you miss meat in any way? Do you miss the choice? Do you miss? Do you think, oh, bacon sandwich?
There are some restaurant issues sometimes. So I'm not particularly one for being at the centre of attention necessarily. I don't like sitting down at a restaurant and having to be the awkward one who is attempting to try and find something to eat.
Yeah.
There are occasional times, I'm a big pizza person, or at least I used to be, where I would miss cheese on a pizza. But when you start to look at these things, it's very much it started to be I want this thing but I can't have it, to I can have this thing if I want to but I really don't want it. The thought of going back to meat now, based on all of the things that I've learned and looked at, it's not really something that I'm going to do, at least until someone gives me a good reason why I should. So if someone's able to convince me that animals aspire to nothing else other than being on our plate, then I'll change my mind immediately.
It sounds like you're throwing down a challenge there.
I always like to hear good arguments because, as we've said before, you don't want to walk around being wrong about things.
No, true.
I will change my mind immediately if it's the case that animals don't feel pain, or like I said, they want nothing more than to be our food. But I don't think that that's going to happen. No,
I'm fairly confident that you're right there.
To end on, if you want to learn more about, for example, animal cruelty, one of the big documentaries is called Earthlings. That will probably say more than I can on this topic because it's the reality of how things result on our dinner table.
Well, I'd just like to end by saying that I think it's really, really good that you question things. You don't just put up with the status quo. You and you make tough choices sometimes. But you can't fight every battle. but you can try and be the best person you can. You know, in your heart, you know, if you've done something good and worthwhile, and so try and be true to yourself. But yeah, keep an open mind always, and always listen to people who have opposing views, because you know there may be some wisdom in it. So yeah, I guess that's all I want to say. But yeah, you haven't convinced me, although you've made some very, very strong points. You know, I kind of think that I might become. I definitely don't eat. I'm not a big meat eater, but you know, I'm not doing our fellow cows and animals a great. I'm not helping them a great deal. Let's just put it that way. But it's going to be hard to give up bacon and eggs, and chicken burgers. Chicken burgers.
I'm not going to tell you it'll be easy. Although there are substitutes for everything. It's just whether or not you're willing to eat those substitutes.
Yeah, and cheese is another one. I mean, I'm lactose intolerant, so I don't drink milk, but I do eat it in the form of cheese, and I shouldn't, but I do anyway because I just love it so much. And when you mentioned pizza, I find it hard to imagine a decent pizza without cheese on it. You know, it's like
there are some pizzas that don't taste too bad, but most of them taste awful with respect to vegan pizza.
Yeah.
The one thing I'd say about in order to be consistent with at least the attempt of truth, you said that you're not doing them a favour.
Yeah.
I would probably go a little bit further on that one based on what we've discussed today.
Right.
But yeah, what would you like to talk about in the next call?
I don't know. We had a couple of ideas, didn't we? What was it?
So one was nutrition, I think. We talked about cars. Is there anything that... I mean, we don't have to decide now necessarily. No. It's just good for continuity.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, nutrition is a funny one, but I think, you know, we'll need to come back to that after, because we've talked... I guess this is about nutrition a bit as well, really. I don't know. Let's have a think about it, and we'll come back and surprise everyone with a new topic maybe next week.
Okay, buddy.
All right. Pleasure.
Thanks for the
talking as always. Thank you
listening.
for enlightening me a little bit. I'm not sure. Some things you just don't want to know. You know, about how animals are. You know, the cruelty to animals and things. But yeah.
Will you watch Earthlings?
I'll give it a watch. How about that?
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Okay. Well,
all right,
cheers
mate. Until next time.
Take it easy. Bye.